Sabrina, welcome
Thank
to the
you.
Charlie Law podcast. I've been trying to get you on pretty much since we started the podcast. So thank you for giving in to my nagging.
Yeah.
And I know my listeners are really in for a treat today. You're a professional certified coach working with both individuals and organizations on aspects such as leadership, culture, and psychological well-being. I think it's fair to say, I've checked out your website just to refresh myself, that your cocktail party elevator pitch would be along the lines of helping people unlock their potential. Now, you're the most highly decorated professional coach I know. And trust me, I've experienced quite a few coaches. Your CV is super impressive. Just to mention a few items, you're accredited by the International Coaching Federation. You're a certified human potential and executive coach. You're a member of the British Psychological Society's special group in coaching psychology.
Oh, I can stop you now.
Because
that, as of 2 years ago, amazing for the BPS, which is the British Psychological Society. They managed to shift it from the special group in coaching psychology to actually being recognized as a full division in coaching psychology.
Okay.
So now it's like these are such pedantic things, but I know for them they'll be like,
so
we're a division.
Okay,
we're
but
no
you
longer
still,
a special
how do
group.
you fit into that?
So I'm still a member, and the studying that I'm doing at the moment will allow me hopefully to become like a more official student member, but you have to have either a BA or a master's in psychology to be able to get that.
Got it. Which is why you're currently studying an MSc in psychology with specialization in business at the University of Strathclyde.
Yeah.
And I also saw that you're a fellow at the Institute of Coaching at McLean Hospital and an affiliate of Harvard Medical School. So clearly highly decorated. Have I missed anything out? Okay. I think what's particularly special about you, Sabrina, the depth and width of your knowledge across coaching. You're like this sort of tree whose roots are tingling with diversity of wisdom and experience. And, your foundations cut across neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, biology, spirituality. And then you layer on top the multiple different schools of thought and academia and research to ultimately inform different coaching and behavioral change techniques and modalities. So you've got the whole suite. And I'm fortunate enough to see you, operating as a coaching client. I've seen you in action, and it's amazing how, depending on who's in front of you, you can use different tools in your armory to have the most amount of impact on that person in that moment. So I think that's quite special, and we'll come on to talk about more of that in a minute. I'd love to just understand a bit more about you and what's your sort of origin story. Why coaching? What inspired you? What happened? What's your story that got you into this?
Yeah, and actually, it's funny how you say that, because I didn't plan to answer it this way. But then when you say it always resonates with me, like the very first moment where you feel something. And so I don't know if I was going to say this, so I'm going to say it, and we're going to see how it goes. But basically, I was like incredibly dyslexic as a child. And we're talking to the point where my parents were considering sending me to a special school just for like learning disabilities rather than being in normal education. And I pleaded and pleaded to go to a normal school. However, that did mean that I really suffered when I was there. And that also may or may not have shown up as a slight rebellious streak. And so I was getting into a lot of trouble by the time I was like 13, 14, 15. And I actually, interestingly, you get in trouble enough at boarding school, you get sent to what they call compulsive counselling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in compulsive counselling. And weirdly, I really didn't find it very helpful. What was really interesting is that what I really wanted instead of the counselling was someone to sort of be like, okay, Sabrina, got your GCSEs coming up. Like, we need to make a very good plan of how you are just going to pass these. Like, this is where your focus needs to be. You need to mobilize yourself towards this. And that needs to be like the only thing that matters. And instead, I had this person wanting to talk about a load of painful things that I didn't really feel like talking about. And I feel like even though their intention would have been good, it really knocked me off kilter more in your GCSE year, which is a really critical year for you to like bring it together and get coursework done.
When you say painful things, you mean sort of digging into the psychology piece?
Oh, and also just like stuff from your past, from like when you were a child, and like processing stuff like that. And I really, if you're a kid and you haven't really, you're 13, 14, you don't really have the tools to like reflect on this while also doing.
Yeah, it sounds like it wasn't the time or the place.
No, exactly. And I really, when I grew up, I very much, so I then left that school. And actually one of the most memorable moments for me is that obviously my parents were like, oh God, like, is she going to be okay? Like, is she going to get A-levels? And my mum really sweetly, we were in an airport and we were in sort of, you get those bookshop, like little stands where you walk through. And there was this book that is probably so cheesy now, but it's so good. And it was called How to Be Brilliant, Change Your Ways in 90 Days. And my mum got it for me. And she was like, you have to read this, as in to like turn your life around, like become an A student and all the rest of it. And actually, weirdly, reading that book was I would say actually my introduction to coaching, as we would call it now. It was very much goal-focused, visualization, affirmations, planning, strategy, mobilizing yourself, creating accountability. And I honestly think that book was such a changing point for me to be able to get my A-levels and actually, organize myself and sort of pull it all together. And so even though I totally abandoned any sort of idea that I would professionally become anything like this, because again, the dyslexia was massively showing up. So when I was at sixth form, they sort of helped me choose my A-levels. And my A-levels were theatre studies, art and textiles, because it had the least amount of reading and writing in those subjects. So then my path was like very funneled towards like, do art. There's very little writing, reading in this direction. And so I came out, did, fashion illustration at London College of Fashion, pursued that route. But I never lost excitement and enthusiasm for the idea of coaching and being able to feel lost and have everything kind of falling apart, and then have these sort of methodologies that actually, if you learn them and implement them well, you can amazingly make a shift and actually become more productive, learn better, feel better, be happy. And so that's why I think in 2019, I think I was just, I absolutely adored the idea of bettering yourself and not giving up and, refusing to think that this is my lane. I have to stay in art. Like there's nothing I can do. And so I found an amazing mentor who honestly also was a really pivotal moment, who's called Dr. Tara Schwartz. She's got a PhD in neuroscience. She was incredible. I saw her at her book launch and I stayed afterwards and I was like, I love you. Like, what you do is so cool. Like, please, can we be friends? And she was amazing because I ended up, I said to her, I really want to do neuroscience. I was so interested in it. She gave me a link to the King's College London, and they do neuroscience. But I had to do a diploma and then a master's to be able to get the master's in neuroscience. And I just was like, ooh, you know what? I haven't done science since GCSE, got a double D. Haven't done maths since GCSE, got a C in like intermediate. Like I don't look like I've got what it takes to be able to do hardcore science. So I put it off and I said to her, I really want to do coaching. But she said, oh, you don't need a master's in neuroscience to do coaching. I was like, really? So she was actually amazing because she really believed in me, and I didn't feel like I had many other people who were really understanding why I wanted to sack in fashion illustration when it was going so well and really pursue becoming a coach. There was sort of a lot of confusion being like, but this is good, and this has a good lifestyle and you're really suited and you're really good at it. So why would you change at 29 to a completely different thing where you're going to be starting like below scratch? And so she really championed me, and that's when I took the plunge, and I just before COVID started, registered with the Human Potential Institute to do coaching. And that was based in California. And like the dedication that you get when you actually assign yourself to the thing that you're really interested in, like that included lectures twice a week that ran from 12 to 1:30 a.m. because it was on Californian time. But I still stayed up and like went to every single one. The enthusiasm for it and what it was and the psychology and learning all these things just sort of exploded for me. And then that's what has now sort of catalyzed the continuous journey through it all the way to now, which is now doing the master's in psychology.
Got it. And I mean, I think that there's a book, Accelerating Excellence. I can't remember the author, but we'll put it in the show notes. But he talks about this idea of getting your sweet spot. And it feels like you've got your sweet spot. It's that idea that when your interests and your passions and your strengths all come together and you take a swing, it's like hitting the sweet spot on a golf club or a baseball bat. The ball just goes much further, and so you're going to outwork the competition because you enjoy it. There's some great lines. So I can definitely see that. And I'm even surprised to hear that you only got into it really in 2019. I didn't realize that. And, you've obviously made huge strides since then. And I'm guessing there's a bit of this belief, your shift in your belief systems. You were believing that maybe you couldn't do this, or your dyslexia, and whether it was your mentor who helped you overcome that, or you going that way, you unlocked the fact that you could actually do these things. And so I'm guessing that's a big part of, what the problem you want to solve for other people as well.
Totally. And what's really interesting from my experience is there is a real difference between doing the surface level belief that you can do something. So you can put it on a vision board, you can write about it, you can give yourself the affirmations, but it does not compare to the deep shift that happens when you actually hit the first milestone that you actually never thought you could. And that for me happened when I'd reached my second training. I was with the Academy of Executive Coaching doing an advanced practitioner diploma in executive coaching. And part of that was having to write quite a long thesis, like theoretical essay, which would show all the psychological underpinning for your method. And I was like, this is not going to go well. This is my first bit of really long writing that I have had to do since GCSE. And, I'm sort of self-studying. So I'm not at school. I don't have any help and the rest of it. And I absolutely thought this is going to be my comeuppance. Like, I'm not going to be able to get around this. And so I wrote it. And then I just remember having it on Word and like highlighting the whole thing, having headphones in and just listening. You can click read aloud, thank God. And like I was listening to the whole thing being like, does that make sense? Is this like a normal sentence structure? Is that the wrong word? And I put so much work into that. And when I got the mark back that it was a distinction, I burst into tears. I think my husband burst into tears. A couple of my close friends cried because it's quite hard to like maintain like, okay, against logical odds, I want to do this thing. And if we look at it on paper, it's not going to look like it would necessarily be successful. But then there's this thing that happens where if you work really hard and you persevere, it's amazing when people can reach those milestones where it actually does make a shift. And now they have real evidence to show that it can be different. And I think, yes, to your point, having experienced that for myself, I feel it's absolutely like imperative to who I am if I can help create that for other people, because I think it's so important. And now if I ever see someone who I think has got really amazing potential, but just isn't believing in themselves enough to create that perseverance to be able to go for it, it's sort of like it's a very deep feeling that you just like, I want to create a space for them so that they feel that they can go and make that shift as well.
What would you call yourself in terms of, maybe you can just give us a little like 101 of like coaching. We've got life coaches, executive coaches, business coaches. What would you call yourself? And can you just break down the different segments?
Yeah. So I call myself what I feel like I'm trained in. So you could call me a human potential coach because I've done that course and been through, and that's sort of like, high performance on both mental and physical plateau. I obviously would call myself an executive coach because I've done an advanced practitioner diploma in it. And so I feel quite confident with that. it's also based on your clients and what they come to you with. But saying that, if we're talking about strict coaching or pure coaching, I know we've used that term interchangeably, and we're talking about the how you would qualify coaching through a level of core competencies like what the ICF has, then there is very little difference probably between all the coaching if you're doing pure coaching, because it's non-instructive, it's non-expert, it's partnering, it's mostly Socratic questioning,
What's that?
Socratic questioning is sort of very bigger picture, open questions to allow someone to sort of challenge their way of thinking of how they are currently problem solving a situation. So everyone has a signature way of solving a problem. And Socratic questioning is a questioning type that tends to, one of the easiest ways to know if you're asking an open question is that it's going to begin with why, how, what. And if you start it like that, it means that the person's going to elaborate a lot more than if I say do.
I'm with you. Is that we had another guy on here, a coach a while ago, and he's totally the opposite to you. I call him the radical coach. I don't think he's got any qualifications, and he's like, just mate, dump your girlfriend or do this or do that, right? Yeah. And I think it's important for people to understand that sort of pure coaching, and that's what you're just explaining. It's sometimes I've been on the other end of it. It can be sometimes quite frustrating and slow, and come on, just give me some answers. But in my experience with you, that's not quite how you operate. It feels more dynamic with you. So where are you on that?
So it's a really interesting one, because of course clients, depending on their personality type, sometimes they'll just go to a coach and they'll just push for advice. And so I think it is really important that you clarify with them. If they wanted advice, they should go to a consultant. If they wanted life experience, they should go to a mentor. And if they want coaching, they should understand what coaching is and go to a coach. And certainly they shouldn't be trying to find therapy and coaching. So there is that importance of having the distinction in between. However, I think there's, Carl Rogers was the father of humanistic psychology. And he very much was of the idea that it's about being authentic with the client, holding them in a non-judgmental space, and giving them sort of a lot of positive regard, which basically means like liking them, believing in them, not being judgy and sort of, I know better than this client, like they're stupid, whatever. And I think as long as for me very much, I believe that if you hold those very true and that you try and show up very authentically in the relationship, if they really know that you've done something and they're pushing and saying, I would really like your answer and you're really, really frustrating me actually that you won't answer it. Yes, you can go down the route of, is this a pattern? Do you only ever make decisions based on external information? And do you ever dive in and look at your own intuition? But there's also...
As a coach, you mean?
No, as the coach, the coachee.
The coachee.
The coach could ask that to the coachee, because if someone's pushing you and saying, I need your answers.
Just tell me what I should do, Sabrina.
That is in itself really interesting, because why do they not trust themselves to answer it? Why do they think that they are not resourceful enough to go and figure this out by themselves? And why do they think that the coach has the answer? Because the coach will have their own life experience. They'll have their different life experience. I always say that what happens in a coaching conversation is a grain of sand on the context of what's going on for the client. So even if a coach ever gives advice, it's based on a grain of sand. It's not based on the bigger picture.
Where does the coach really fit in from mentorship, speaking to your friends and family, a psychologist, because a lot of people will be like, well, I don't need a coach. I sit around a kitchen table and have a good conversation with my wife or my husband. Can you just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah. And so first of all, I think talking to your wife, husband, and friends is extremely important. And I would say 100% do that. However, like all humans, they are going to bring their own life experience, perspective, belief systems to your problem. And so what you get when you receive advice from someone normally is a reflection of who that person is, shining their light through a filter on your situation. What a coach is trained to do is to not do that, which is very hard.
Very hard, yeah.
Right? So you're going to bring your thing, and they have a multiple of tools, but their main objective is for you to find a congruent answer from within yourself to solve the problem. Reason that's better sometimes is that you end up feeling more resourceful. Your self-efficacy, which means your belief in your own ability to meet the task at hand, will go up. You might grow your internal locus of control. That means that you grow in your ability to think that you can handle things. All of these sort of stacked psychological principles happen when you allow the client to resource themselves.
Which is why, going back to the other side of the spectrum, that pure coaching, that's why it's designed. Because if you can get the client to come up with the reasons themselves, it's normally more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, for some people, one of the most famous things I think for coaches to always live by, and they do say this, is that a good coach should be coaching themselves out of a job from the second they meet you. Because the objective is for you to not feel like you need a coach, because you have got to a place of empowerment, you feel resourceful, you've got good self-potency, self-efficacy, all these things. And you're like, oh, I know how to sit down with myself and problem solve and expand my way of thinking or try a different strategy, but I trust myself that I can do this. Whereas so let's flip it, right? So let's say you go to someone and they make you feel like they have all the answers and you don't. And they also make you feel that you need to ask permission or you need someone else to validate your own decisions. That starts to literally erode all those things that we talked about. So your circle of control or locus of control will get smaller because you'll think,
you become more reliant.
You might, your self-esteem might go down to trust yourself for your own decision-making. And so all of those things that coaching was designed to do, to build someone up so that they feel empowered and they can handle it and it's all good. If you end up going into a situation where the person is literally just giving you advice, and not only are they giving you advice, but they are like, I'm an expert, I'm so clever, I hold all the answers, you know nothing. This is not great for the overall holistic view of that person. Even if people push for it to happen, it's still always going to be better to help the person grow into a person that they themselves can trust then. And of course, there are times where you aren't going to know the answer, but then that's why people make these really clear distinctions where if you're going to do consultancy and coaching, or if you're going to do mentoring and coaching, you make it abundantly clear in a contract the difference between them. And when you're moving between. Exactly. So,
and do you do that both, do you sometimes contract with a client and be like, I'm going to act as a mentor and a coach, and I'm going to let you know when I've got the different hats on?
Exactly. And then you want to try and keep them separate, but there's going to be some times where if someone's come to you and that's what they want and you have contracted for it, then there's going to be points where they're like, I know you had this situation. Like, can you just tell me, how I register for the data protection or something?
It's like, come on.
I'm not going to do this myself.
I think it's a good opportunity to ask about, I call it the exotic cocktail story, because, you're obviously not allowed to talk about any of your clients. I'm one of your clients and I'm cool about talking about it. So I think there's a great case study or an example. Like I think it was last year, I was struggling about, what am I going to do for my career? And I got really I used to be a commodity trader. I loved that. It was exciting. Didn't go very well. Entrepreneurial. I tried a bunch of things. And for whatever reason, though, I had a few failures and got really into the self-development stuff. And I got the book coming out and doing a bit of coaching, etc. And then I spoke to a couple of my mentors and they're like, Charlie, I think if you just go down the self-development route, I think that, you might regret it, building a certain type of life, you like traveling and horses, etc. You might not make enough money and, you might get bored or whatever. You love commodity trading and technologies of the future. And they kind of reminded me of that because I'd sort of put it out of my mind like a belief. Or, I don't want to go in that world anymore because it's full of crooks and cortisol, right? And then I was like, Sabrina, I don't know what to do because I love the self-development stuff. And, I think I do actually like the commodity trading stuff. Like, I don't know what to do. And I'd done all the exercises, I'd done all the meditations, I'd read all the books, I'd had conversation with my mentors and my wife and my family. And it was driving me freaking crazy because it's like, I just wanted to go. I just wanted clarity. And so we sat down and you helped me see that it was an identity limitation. I I wasn't able to let go of the commodity trading thing or the self-development thing, because I'm like, if I won't be the self-development guy anymore, or I won't be the commodity guy anymore. So I wasn't making a decision. And anyway, long story short, you helped me see that I could create an exotic cocktail. I could go into commodities and mining, which I do have a passion for, but do it the right way, build wealth like that, champion self-development, and I can have everything that I want. And there were a certain type of way that you guided me through that helped me see that, and nothing else, and nothing else could. So why am I saying this? It's an example of how useful coaching can be in and around the family, the mentors, the psychology, etc. But more of a question to you. You've got people's lives in your hands, like that conversation that I had with you has a major determining factor on the next 2 decades of my life where I put my energy and attention. So how does that make you feel?
I think that's why, for me, it's about never stop studying. Like you have to see the responsibility, and it's up to you and you other coaches. But for me, certainly, it's about absolutely knowing ethical guidelines very, very strictly, being extremely clear on having self-control in sessions, because everyone has the propensity to be like, I'd love to recommend this, but you're like,
must be
yeah,
so tempting.
And so it's a combination of understanding what coaching is, what coaching isn't, being very clear on the boundaries, knowing the ethical guidelines, and never stop learning, never stop trying to understand the framework that is underpinning the operation of what's happening in the session. And it's interesting because there's a balance in coaching. So they say, yes, do all this learning. And then when you're in the session, sort of be at peace with that you know nothing. And I feel like it's definitely one of those things that you have to nurture over time.
For everyone listening out there who might have a coach, not be happy, want a different coach, or might want to get into get a coach, what would be your sort of advice around best practices, how to choose one? And is this sort of idea of fit interests me, because I think how important is sort of background and cultural fit? So your coach kind of understands where you might be coming from, as opposed to someone from, working remotely who's in living on the other side of the world.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because, again, I think it's personal preference. But when I've spoken to other people, not in a coaching capacity, just friends, or acquaintances, that you meet out, a lot of people express the wish that they would like to think that their coach shares a similar background or cultural understanding to them, because I feel that clients feel like they don't want to have to explicitly explain everything that is going on for them. They would like, in a perfect world, to feel like they're speaking to someone who just gets it. And I feel that means that they have a higher propensity to look for people who they feel would understand their situation further. However, there are people who are completely opposite to that and say, no, I really want to be with someone who is completely different from me, so that they will, they'll really reflect back to me how individual my way of thinking is. Because the risk is that if you have someone very similar, they're going to be blind spots that you both maybe have, that you're both not catching. Whereas if you go and meet someone from a completely different cultural upbringing, everything background, they're going to be able to see and maybe bring to the surface a lot more of that implicit norms that you might not be aware of.
Blind spots that you might. It's the same as having a real in a team at work, having a real cultural diversity. So you get different minds and different angles and different beliefs. That makes a lot of sense. Where does one go to start looking for a coach? Yeah. And in terms of there are different types of life coaches who've been taught and studied different modalities and techniques. So what should people sort of look out for? And is the number one goal to find someone like yourself who has a suite of techniques and modalities that in their toolbox?
So answering the first question, where you would go. So there's something called the Life Coach Directory. Isn't that amazing?
There we go. There we go. That easy.
But then obviously you're on there and you want to qualify what coach you would like to see. Of course, there's a problem with what I'm about to say. First thing I'm about to say is that for safety reasons, I would prefer for people to go with accredited coaches because so here's the wonderful thing about an accredited coach. Let's say you don't like coaching with them. You can call the accreditation, you can complain about the coach, and the coach will receive a ramification to not being a good coach. If someone is not with any accredited body, there is no complaint line. So you don't have a good experience with that coach. Having some sort of ramification or safety or, anything around it, like, I don't know what ethical standards they would hold themselves to unless they've written their own or that whole thing. So of course there's that safety. Immediately saying that, I have to put a massive caveat in. There are incredible coaches who have PhDs, who have written books, who may not have been bothered to go and get an accreditation because they're so highly decorated.
Mm.
And so, of course, then, I'm exactly going back on what I've just said because they're going to be an incredible coach. They may not have accreditation whatsoever. So with all things, you just want to become really savvy. Like if someone doesn't look like they have lots and lots of experience and they have very high qualifications, you're going to want to look for someone who's accredited just as a little bit of a safety. And the main schools for that are the AC, which is the Association of Coaches, the ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, and the EMCC, which is the European Mentoring Coaching Council. I might be getting that wrong, but it's
Sounds
similar.
right.
Yeah. And to do with, obviously, there's lots of different modalities of coaching. There's lots of different frameworks and stuff like that. At the end of the day, I think you just have to read people's descriptions and you just have to push for a consultation call. And most coaches will give consultation calls for free. And really, you just want to use that hour or however long they give you to ask every single question that you feel that you need to, and really try and get an idea of, what's this person's personality like? How do I feel like they're going to work with me? Do I like how they ask questions? Do I like how they pace the session? You could have, let's say, two ends of a spectrum. You could have someone who is extremely high energy and you can feel they're pumped for you to get your goal.
They really care.
Oh, yeah. And then you can have someone who adores really long silences for you to fully tune into what's present in the moment. For some people, this is going to drive them insane, and for other people, they're going to be like, that person was super pushy. I didn't have time to think. So again, it's
finding the right fit. It's like choosing a personal trainer or whatever.
Totally, yeah.
Can I ask you to give some abstract examples of scenarios where you've really helped people, but you can't really talk about?
I would like not to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Only because it's
I think the reason I ask is because I think a lot of these things, it's quite easy to talk kind of around it all. But I mean, we used that one example of me trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I think sometimes it's quite difficult for people to think, hang on, what would I actually speak to a coach about? If I've ever got a problem, I might speak to my friends or my family or whatever. If I'm super unhappy, maybe I should go and see a psychologist. If I needed advice about work and stuff, I might go and see my boss or one of my mentors, or I'm in that mastermind. Where does coaching, where does it come in? Why do I need a coach? What kind of situations would I need a life coach in?
Well, so I think you hit the nail on the head that not everyone needs a life coach, maybe. Or, if everything is going well and you are really happy and you have your progress, you haven't received any negative feedback from anyone, no complaints, why go pay for a coach? You could, but it's going to spend money, and there's you're going to go to them and they're like, what's your goal? And to be consistent. And I'm already really accountable for myself. So that one maybe, don't. But I feel like so I can mainly talk to my experience. And obviously I've had, coaching peers who've coached me in training and the rest of it. And so I can talk about that. And I use these, but I don't want to talk about individual
That's
when
fine.
I've used them.
That's
so
fine.
for me, I think the most useful things is the real value of coaching is when you discover a new perspective on your situation that you maybe could not have found or seen by yourself. And that unlocks a plethora of possibilities and it creates a huge shift. And that's when I feel that people really flourish in coaching, is that they have a goal. They've struggled to attain the goal by themselves. They would like the coach to help them move towards the goal. And through that process, they discover multiple things about themselves, their way of thinking, their way of processing, that actually means that they grow like psychologically as a person, so that they can handle higher mental complexity, that they have better metacognition, which is that they're not just thinking and they're fused to their thinking, but they can actually see themselves thinking and think about how they're thinking. That's quite hard.
To that point of not thinking alone.
Yeah. That's quite hard to do by yourself because you're thinking and then trying to also think about your thinking and not catch yourself fusing with that thinking. Are you fusing with your metacognition thinking about your thinking? And so it's one of those things where that's why I think the relationship matters so much. If you're in coaching and you don't like your coach, everything they do is just going to end up annoying you. Let's say they reflect back something, or you're getting the really long pauses that you didn't want, or, you're always going to try exercises that sometimes don't work. Fine. But if you have a coach that you really resonate with and there's trust there and they're very skillful, some of the things that you do, so whether that's something called Gestalt chair work, tends to have like a really changes people's perspective. You can either take yourself and someone that you are having a fight with, or someone that you need to sort of have a serious conversation with, and you pretend to be both people and you improvise. But what that does is it allows you to unlock really stepping into their perspective and get the theory of mind on that person and like empathize. I think so many times if we are fighting with someone and we can't get past it, it's almost a refusal to empathize with them. It's like, I won't. I don't even want to know their side of the situation. And maybe left to your own devices, you're not going to. But it maybe if that's something that you bring to coaching and they offer this and you do that exercise, then you might leave being like, wow, I completely have a new perspective of where that person was coming from. This has unlocked the possibility that now I feel solution focused and that I now feel empowered about a decision that I might make to go and become this way with this person to make our lives better. And all of those sort of things is very, very hard to do by yourself. Another key example of something that really works in coaching that's really hard to do by yourself is something called an embodiment exercise, which is the idea that it's that whole, you've done too much thinking with your head and it's not getting us anywhere. So you sort of allow the person to get into a relaxed state, and then you sort of completely abstract the feeling that they have by using the body, which is going to be giving them the bottom up signals of how they're feeling. So you would close your eyes, and then the classic questions are, can you feel this thought in your body? Where is it? What does it feel like? Can you describe it more? And by doing that, you unfuse from the feeling and you abstract it. And then you normally ask something like, if this feeling could speak to you, what would it say? And sometimes in those moments, you just say stuff that you had no idea you were going to say. And really, sometimes that can create like an emotional shift. Sometimes it can create an aha moment. But again, all of those things, I would say, are really, really difficult to do by yourself, because it's very hard to guide yourself while you're also trying to relax and do something else. So there's 100% a case and a purpose for coaching, but I wouldn't go around waving the flag being like, everyone needs it all the time. I'll be like, you really they call it readiness for change, is that you shift into a position where instead of feeling that it's something that's available but you don't really care, it's something has shifted for you and you're like, I actually really want coaching because I want this thing bad enough that I want someone else to help me figure it out and go and get accountability for it. And that means that you're in the right spot for it, because you've shifted into like an action-orientated attract. I want this service to help me do this. If someone's like, oh, I just gave coaching a go, I didn't really want it, it's gonna be such worse. It's not gonna have the same effect as if you had shifted into that other stage of readiness.
And so on the consultation call, what other advice about red flags to look out for and good questions to ask?
Yeah.
Anything else?
Things that people I think don't know. You're 100% in your right to ask for the person's CV. This never happens. This never happens. But you can totally say, can I see your CV? Because you want to know where their training was, like how long was it? Coaching, unfortunately, is one of those really mysterious things where someone can call themselves a coach with no training. Someone can call themselves a coach with a weekend training, or someone could have done a PhD in coaching psychology. And it's like, so just saying someone's a coach or someone's, some sort of title might not be enough. You might want to really qualify how long was that training, how thorough, and whether you trust that. Obviously, ask people if they have insurance. I think it's a massive red flag if they don't, obviously, because they should have it to be practicing. But that will really help you. If someone says no, that would be a giant red flag, for example. Other questions to ask is, so what are they learning at the moment? Are they accredited? If they say no, I'd love, ask them why not. Some people have reasons. If their reason is, well, I've got a PhD in coaching psychology, I didn't think it was necessary. Like, that's going to be a much better answer to, I don't want to sign up to it because I haven't had enough hours yet. And you're like, how many hours do you have underneath you? You can ask that. Obviously, with accreditation, they tell you. So if you're PCC, you've had 500 client hours. If you're ACC, it's 100. So that's one way. But you'll want to know, has this person seen a lot of people, or am I their third client and this is their 8th session, sort of thing? Does that make any sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I remember you talking about that idea of the client, never lose that sense of agency, and don't, if you're having a coaching session and exercises aren't working, say, or if you don't feel this is right, change. And I think you said you loved a quote, Hippocrates.
Yeah.
If you are not your own doctor, you're a fool. Like,
yeah.
Ultimately, I'm guessing it's like, don't put all of your eggs in their basket and just say, like, I'm in your hands now. Is that right?
And it is. And it was really interesting when I was typing the answer to that one, because I first answered it and then I realized there was a caveat. So the first answer is, ideally, you want to be your own agent. You want to take responsibility for your growth. And that means that you should keep a critical mind. You should, analyze whether the people you're about to work with are any good. You should want to feel invested and responsible enough to check things. That said, that works perfectly in coaching, in a perfect coaching scenario.
I was going to say, like, it's a difficult dance to dance, because a lot of the time you get coaching because you've got a problem and you kind of want to put yourself in someone else's hands for help. So you kind of need to trust to an extent, but I suppose it's just keeping that antenna, really, isn't it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because that's the caveat. That is totally not the advice that would happen, I suppose, if you're looking for therapy, because you're not. How can you feel like totally looking after yourself and responsible if that is exactly not the feeling that you're feeling? You're going to go look for help. So the best time to find the most amazing coach is when you don't need one. The best time to find an amazing doctor is when you don't need one, because you have the time and the resources to be able to qualify multiple people and, do some research and figure it out. The worst time to go and find someone is when you feel that you're in dire need of their help, and then you're in a very short time zone. You just want the first person to be able to fix the problem. So, not that I really see this happening a lot, but that would be the best advice, is to, if you think you ever want coaching in the future but you don't want it now would be a good time to go and pinpoint the coach that you want, because you have plenty of time, you're in no rush, and you can really qualify it. But if you suddenly feel like everything's not working and you're lost and you need some goal direction, and now I'm not going to be able to feel so level-headed and be able to qualify everyone as good. The most important thing is that you're engaging in a sort of what they would call a partnership in coaching, especially. So this person is going to basically be your thinking partner, your accountability partner. They are going to be holding a space for you that you feel that you can best work in towards the goal that you have. And it's sort of like you're basically giving people job interviews for that role. So it doesn't mean that you have to just accept someone who's got the most qualifications. It's also about, do you feel that you can work together well? Is there humor? Like whatever your preference is for how you want to qualify someone, that should be really important for that person to feel that they can justify their choice based on that.
Just before we come on to the business and executive stuff, I just want to talk about sequence, because sequence is something that I'm big into. Like when you're making change or engaging in personal development, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned is that sequencing is so important. There's no point trying to create your long-term goals or vision if you've got some psychological things like getting in your way, because you're not going to get them. Or equally well, there's no point signing up for a psychologist and understanding the inner workings of your mind if you're biologically and your physiology is not right. You're dehydrated, you're eating crap, you can't get out of bed in the morning, you're not doing exercise. Those kind of things. No point in going to see a coach before you've seen a psychologist if you're in that minus and not, you don't have some sort of basic foundation. So how important is sequencing to you around, this generally personal development and coaching?
Yeah, I think hugely important. As total nail on the head is that if you're in need of therapy, you should probably do therapy before you put yourself in coaching. There are people who will have therapy and coaching together, but I think that's a very delicate dance then between the therapist and the coach to not be creating conflicting frameworks between the two, especially if the person feels that they have completely conflicting accountabilities that they want to achieve in each one in between. Like one of them's rest and the other one's like go-getter. You're like, now you have a week until you see both of them, and which one are you going to choose? So that one's a little bit difficult. But definitely the whole point is that some things will challenge you and you'll need to be fit enough to take the challenge. And some things are there to help restore you to a happy place of like homeostasis, of like happy functioning. And there's something actually really famous called, Kurt Lewin was this amazing psychologist who force field analysis. And he basically said that when you're changing, it's really important to lessen the things that are holding you back or where you are before you increase the tension on the things that are pulling you forward. Because if I don't lessen these things pulling me back and I just increase the tensions of the things pulling me forward, I'm being stretched. The tension that I'm experiencing is going to be really, really strong. And so I think sometimes when people want to ignore the things holding them back, they want to look at the things pulling them forward, but they actually will be creating undue tension for themselves. And so there's definitely the sequence that you would want to do is that whatever's holding me back, whether that's health, whether that's my psychology, whether that's my environment, my job, whatever, if I really want to go get this thing, I will want to loosen the hold of these things that they have on me before I go and push in this direction. And so I think that's always really important to remember, because I think I'm definitely someone who I understand the sort of pleasure that comes with fully going for a goal and really, really loving it. But that's almost like you get a little dopamine kick out of thinking about the things that you really want to start, like the new shiny project. But it's the same thing. Like you need to finish the other projects that you have. Otherwise, you're going to become extremely stretched and then that's not going to be very good. So 100% to do with sequencing is that you will want to get yourself to a position where you're not feeling tension for where you've been or holding you back or feeling tired or dehydrated or all those things before you increase tension to up the challenge and get to another level and all those things. It's so there's a nice upward, like smooth line like this rather than like a sort of yanking someone apart slowly.
Talk to me about the world of executive coaching, going to businesses. Really fascinated to know about that. In particularly, what does it even look like when you go to companies? I think you worked for, you were in-house executive coach at quite a major company previously.
So I did, I was part of a group of external coaches who worked with management and leadership at Cisco. And then I also worked as a psychological coach at AXA. But I also work individually with executives, founders, leaders, also sort of individual freelancers or whatever. I think the main thing that's really interesting when you go into an organization that's different from coaching people who aren't part of organizations is that you start having to apply systems theory, because this person isn't, I mean, of course, no person's an island, but when you see someone individually, then that it's not like they have tons of direct reports and how they show up is immediately affecting the emotional space of other people.
Okay,
right?
so I'm guessing systems theory is the sort of interoperability of like, you're not just dealing with one person, it's how they affect and how they're being affected by the culture.
Well,
Is bearing that in mind.
Yeah, so one of the best analogies I've heard for systems theory is that it's like a mobile that hangs above like a cot. And the idea is that if you pull one end of it, the whole thing will move.
Got it.
And so you're not suddenly in this, what could be, feels like a bit more of a straight line when you're doing individual coaches. And let's say it's, yes, that person has their family and their friends and the rest of it, but it doesn't feel as complex as sometimes the systems theory that you apply to people who are working in an organization. And obviously what comes into coaching a lot is relationships with other workers, and either, someone's looking at how to motivate people on their team or how to speak to someone above them. And so immediately a lot more of the focus is actually relationship based, rather than an individual who's not working in an organization might actually do a lot more deeper self-reflective work in coaching, because they're not constantly being part of an emotional people system. But the organizational psychologist side of things is less to do with the individual and more to do with the organization as a system. So that's to do with how do you, about like safety cultures, or how to motivate a workforce. What are the different levers that you can move to do with whether people perceive that like they are getting equitable value exchange from the business in terms of their service and what they give. And there's this thing called the psychological contract, which might not be in the actual contract between employees and organizations, but it's this sort of unspoken understanding that if I do this, I'm expecting this behavior from you. And if that's met, it tends to lead to high psychological well-being for both employees and organizations. If it's breached, then you can have all sorts of problems go awry. Where people might, there's so many terms that have been coming up to do with like silently quitting, or all of those terms where people, they're either disengaging or they're actively sabotaging. That would obviously be terrible. There's a whole array of, again, it's that systems theory. It's like you move this one thing. Like, let's say I want to, an intervention that you could do is create a specific token economy where different teams might get a specific reward for certain performance. But we already know from goal theory that if you set a performance goal, you're going to become more competitive. If you take that too far, you might cheat. You might actually go beyond ethical guidelines to meet that. Whereas if we set like a learning goal, which is, it's not performance based, it's whoever can, be innovative with it, but it's about us learning together and sharing knowledge, then that's going to avoid that propensity to cheat and become hyper competitive. So it's sort of their job is to work with organizations to help them understand that whole psychological aspect.
And this is what you are studying to become, and your title will be
industrial organizational psychologist.
Industrial organizational psychologist. So
or work psychologist.
Work psychologist.
Just throw that in
so previously you've been doing leadership and executive, where you go into a company and you're speaking to the individuals.
Yeah. Coaching.
Yeah. Coaching. Once you finish this degree, you'll be going in and looking at the environment, culture, etc. When you go into any of these companies with either hat on, do you have to have a conversation with the boss, the CEO, the chairman first to understand and get a feeling for the nuance of, how he wants the culture and his people to operate, and where that range is between all sorts of things? I guess that's an obvious question when you're looking at the culture and the environment, but how much does that influence your conversations with the individuals when you're doing the leadership and the executive?
Yeah, so there's a whole thing to do with coaching in organizations. And really what you're doing at that point is you're part of a 3-party contract, because you'll have what they call the sponsor, who's the person paying for it, which is normally the organization. Then you have the coachee, who's the person in your session with you. And, there are plenty of examples that coaches are trained on to do with the messiness of confidentiality and what you have contracted for. And so obviously tends to be that everyone understands that you're not going to be breaking confidentiality with coachees to give information to the sponsor. That's just,
Sure.
So it's very much about.
I think actually when we had the sports guys on here, Ben Earls and Callum, the head of psychological performance at Saracens, that was a similar point, because they were talking about, when he's talking to the players about what's really going on and how can we help and getting into the, some difficult conversations or struggles and things. Previously, I think historically, some of those conversations were going back to the manager or the coach, and it wasn't doing the players any favors. And so I think that confidentiality is so important, so it's not used against you, right?
Totally. And I think it massively affects how a coachee will show up in coaching. Because if a coachee if you think
you're a spy, you could be a spy.
Yeah, exactly, is being fed back, how your ability to be authentic and, explore things that, classic in an organization is that if you think something's going to be fed back, you don't want to seem incompetent. But becoming incompetent and saying, like, I don't know how to do this is part of the first unpacking of a problem to reorganize it to start.
Sure, they're not going to open up. They're not going to open up, are they? Okay. So, I mean, I find the subject of culture, performance, human motivation fascinating. There's obviously like a lot going on in the world now with, obviously it doesn't help with people remote working, but a team, corporate team, what are you seeing and what are the levers that you can pull to motivate and ultimately enhance performance of a team and change that change culture?
So with teams specifically, so I also did a certificate course in systemic team coaching, which was really, really interesting. And with that, we used a case study example of just after an acquisition, you've got a leadership team of a company that isn't enjoying gelling well.
That's a great example,
right?
Isn't it?
And so now you've got a problem, because if this team doesn't figure out a way to, and that's the whole force field analysis, right? It's, they could essentially be really holding on to how things were and how they were better. And if there isn't a sort of like closing this chapter, having peace with it, and really being like there was a previous plan that we were working to, now we're in a new plan, happy to go forward with this, then you've got forces trying to pull them into like, come on, new business, new setup, let's go this way. And you've got them holding on, and that's going to create in-team tension, which is not going to be good for any of them. And then you start to create tension for any sort of system. You're going to start to see sort of like ruptures of stress happening, and then people lash out, and the whole sort of psychological safety is going to come down. So this is a systems theory. So really, where coaching I think works quite well is very much in those situations, especially with teams, is that the team has been requested to adapt to something that is not their norm. And actually they have the pressure of still doing the day-to-day job, but also then the added pressure of figuring out how they fit maybe in a new hierarchy, how it works with new processing. Maybe they all are collectively having to learn new IT, and then that's going to have all sorts of frustrations. And it's not that the coach, again, ever is an expert or is telling them what to do, but it's that person who's been trained to be non-judgmental, to hold that sort of space, to allow people to feel held, that they can work things out in a designated space that leads to higher team collaboration and understanding.
What are some of the levers, what are the sort of things that bosses and leaders can do if, the culture's not very good at the business? People are turning up for the paycheck. They're trying to put the bonuses and the incentives and, they're just still clocking off at 5 o'clock and, people are kind of running their own races. People aren't being very radically transparent with each other. That there's not so much alignment. There's high turnover in the company. Like, let's just assume that the promised land is to have everyone, wearing the company's badge on their arm. They're grafting, they're incentivized, they're really enjoying it. The culture's great. There's a very positive, optimistic culture. And the company performance as a result of that is doing really well. Like, what would be some of the things that one would look at to try and, bring the culture from over here to over here?
Yeah. I mean, there are so many ways to answer that question. So I'm not going to say that this is the answer.
Yeah.
But this is one.
Just nugget.
One
just
thing
nuggets.
you can do
Yeah.
is, I think a lot of times there is a huge amount of influence that trickles from top down in an organization. I think lots of people look to leadership to understand how they should be behaving, what behavior does the organization value. They're looking at these people as role models who have been selected to lead, essentially, and be someone, who that they think they should be emulating. And so that's why I think there is a lot of, leadership development and leadership coaching, is because there are so many different leadership styles, and everyone acknowledges that, yes, there are going to be different situations where different leadership styles are going to be useful. But collectively, sometimes, most of the time, you would say that a transformational leadership style would be ideal. And that borders a very close line with something called like a very charismatic leadership style.
Sorry, transformative leadership style.
Yeah.
What is that?
So that is basically where people feel that they believe in the leader, they like the leader, they respect the leader, that they're working not for the compensation value exchange, but because they believe in the company's vision, they believe in the company's mission, they are invigorated by the leader's dedication, and people are inspired to put in above effort, not because they think they're going to get some transactional reward for it, but because it's starting to become innately rewarding to work as a group towards that end. And that tends to be, when people give examples, they talk about like Martin Luther King or all these people. But that's ideally what I think most leadership tries to aim for.
And getting behind a cause and a movement and a purpose.
Yeah. And having, if someone, you will know if you have someone who you feel like that about in your life, whether you actually know them or not. Like maybe it's a famous person, a celebrity. For some people, when I ask them like, what's your favorite example of someone you would like to be led by? They might give like Roger Federer or some sort of like
someone that inspires you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's like ideal leadership style, because people are, the effort is low. People are naturally drawn. You're naturally magnetic. People believe in the cause. They want to work. Everyone's happy. The flip side is that it can get very close to like narcissistic, charismatic leadership, or that you create such a die-hard culture that becomes like a cult.
Mm.
And that's sort of like the dark side of transformational leadership, is that you inspire almost too much dedication far beyond the well-being of the individual employees. And so there's a fine line there to balance. And so if you wanted, as you said, to get the whole organization working, and one of the levers that you can pull is really digging into what is the current leadership style at the moment. What are they using? Is it transactional? Is it transformational? Do we have any narcissistic, charismatic leaders working? And, sort of taking a sort of snapshot of where it is now, and then where do we think if we implemented either executive coaching, leadership coaching, maybe some leadership and development. There are all of these different modalities that you can do for leaderships to like make a shift. selecting what you think is the correct one for that, and then having that become like a top-down change in an organization is one of many. But you wanted a nugget.
No,
so
I like it.
that,
I like it.
yeah.
I mean, that leadership is obviously so powerful, right? I mean, throughout this conversation, I feel like I'm speaking to a professor sometimes. You know, you've got so much knowledge and there's clearly a huge drive. And, you know, clearly there's a lot of ambition there. And I can see, you know, there's a lean now towards the business, corporate stuff. Like what's driving you and where do you want to be? And, you know, who are your, who would be your ideal sort of clients?
So the thing that interests me the most is like solving complex problems. I know that's going to sound really weird, but actually it was really funny. Before coming here, I was rereading my dyslexic report because I know that there was going to be the origin journey and the question of that. And what's really interesting is that I had my dyslexic like analysis done when I was 20, because my first one was when I was 5, and then they were like, we need to retest you because you've come a long way since then. And what was really interesting is, yes, okay, reading and spelling were in the, like, how bad I was only present in like 1% of cases for my age. So we're talking like horrendously bad. But what was really interesting was that problem solving and generating ideas was in the top 2% of anyone my age for that test.
Wow.
And there's just something about organizations for me that there are so many moving parts to it. It's so dynamic and it's so complex that I naturally find it quite fascinating. And
it stimulates you more.
Yeah.
The harder it is, the more rewarding it is potentially.
Right. And what's the nice thing is that an organization or a business has, you know, attempted to fix some sort of problem that customers experience, whether that's through a service or a product. And their mission is to deliver that to people. So, you know, they've already got a goal. Like they're already a goal-directed entity. But what you then add into it is that inside of that goal-directed entity are multiple people with different personalities and individual dynamics going on, both individually and socially, that then need to work out so that everyone has high well-being, but also that performance goals are met. And that's my favorite problem-solving scenario.
For all of those budding coaches, life coaches, people who are thinking that they might quit their job and change and go into this as a career, what advice would you give them? And what's the supply and demand like at the moment? Is there a glut of coaches out there? I know obviously that if you're really good, you're going to find people, but particularly starting out might be difficult. And is demand equally as high with, you know, people looking to this type of thing more and more?
So it's interesting because I think people in the UK looking for coaches has never been this high, because I honestly think 5 years ago, it was way more present in America than it was here. However, I do think there seemed to have definitely been a move over COVID where maybe a lot of people felt like they needed coaching, and also coaching became for a lot of people a way of working that suited being stuck in a house and not being able to leave. And so that was a transition. I definitely think that coaching is quite saturated at the moment. And it's one of those things where you do end up existing in an echo chamber. So I constantly see new people becoming coaches and new coaching things and the industry growing, but I'm in it and I'm super sensitive to spotting it if I see something like that happening. At the same time, I do think there is an increase in people wanting coaching, but I think people, okay, so here's something that I would caution people. I think it's very easy for companies to market people to become coaches, because what they're going to do is they're going to sell them, hey, come and train with us. Come and have this amazing...
Oh, these are accreditation companies.
Not even that. This is just coach training. And some
Okay.
of them might be accredited, some of them might not.
Fine.
But they'll say, hey, you know, do you want to work from anywhere in the world just from a laptop?
There's the picture of you on the beach in Bali,
Yeah.
right?
And like, do you want your work to be like deeply fulfilling as you help other people achieve their goals? And like, some of these coaches are earning da 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 da, and like, what a wonderful world. And if you're thinking of becoming a parent, or if you want to have a side hustle, like, it then becomes this like, would you like to have a fulfilling job that allows you to work from anywhere? The dream situation here, coaching. That's the answer. And I think people need to use a critical mind against that kind of marketing and understand that that is their prerogative to convince you that you need to buy their service, which is coach training. So you need to sort of be a bit more...
Have your antenna up.
Yeah, exactly. Have your antenna out and just, don't allow yourself to be convinced that coaching's the right thing for you to do. You more want to be that I could do other things, and maybe I would like to do other things, but I'm called to this so much so that I'm happy to work really hard for it and have it be really uncomfortable and go through hard times, because I deeply believe that it's important for me to learn to do this and be of service to people. And I can't pull away from it. It's really important to me. And I'm actually okay if I don't become Tony Robbins or, whoever it is. I don't become this hugely successful person. It's more that I'm so passionate about what the actual job entails than me thinking that it'll allow me to work on holiday or all of those other things. Does that make any sense?
And if the former is the case, can you give any guidance into, good certification program or accreditation school?
Yeah, totally. I think the best way to do it is to reverse engineer it. So before you even look at a training, you can go to the ICF website and you can see which trainings are recognized by the ICF. You don't want to spend tons of money doing coach training. People obviously have done this, and there are trainings that aren't with the ICF, they're with other people. And so, I'm just using a small example, but, I think it could be frustrating if you have aspirations to work in organizations, for example, and let's say some organizations might only recognize like a level PCC and above from ICF. You will want to know, but then before you go and pay for coach training, whether the training that you're about to do
is going to
lead you to that place. So it's sort of about, where do you envision yourself working in coaching? What's the sort of path in between where that is and where you are now? And then figuring out where are the different levels that you need to go to knock those off to get the green card to go and work in that environment. And for all different types of things, it will be different, but that's what I would do instead of just going and doing the most snazzy one, because you might decide that you want to go work here and actually maybe training is not recognized at all by these people. And so now you have to do another training. It's just annoying. So it's figuring out where you want to ultimately be, and then reverse engineering what the path looks like to that. The better question almost is that what do you wish existed for yourself? Because maybe it isn't a coach. Maybe you wish there was an army of mentors in like coding for women, and that you wish that existed. You don't want to then try and pursue a career of how to be a coding coach. You might want to actually organize an organization that has multiple women coders who mentor other,
Agreed.
If you do want to be a coach, yes, I think that's a great question, is what kind of coach do you wish you had? And I feel like you will be very authentic and congruent if you stay true to that and become what you wish you had, rather than trying to be a coach that someone else would want, but maybe that's not what you would want personally, and that might feel a bit sort of sticky. But also, to do with that whole bigger question of finding what's your purpose, what you want to do as your sort of ikigai, or, that whole thing that fits into what someone will pay me for, what I, love doing, and all the rest of it.
Or your values, what you're good at.
Exactly. Is that it sometimes comes out of not pre-labeling what it is, but more about drawing what it looks like. And then saying, well, actually, this isn't this is something else. So you could have someone who's like, I'm super passionate about wellness. I really want to be a nutritionist, but when they dig into it, no, they don't. They actually want to be a personal trainer, because they're much more excited about working with someone's like musculoskeletal system than that. So it's more about authentically asking yourself, what, because with these things, I really feel like there's a really famous saying where some PhDs are PhMes, and it's that people
They're solving their own problem.
Exactly. And I feel like even if you're not doing a PhD, that sometimes if you tend to be an entrepreneur or you really lean into like the questions of what's my purpose, what would be the most aligned work for me to do, it often is you fixing a problem
that you have.
But
that's super interesting because you see a lot of that in entrepreneurship, and a lot of people say that's the way that you should go. This is the book that I wish I existed for me, or this is the coaching program, or this product that, wasn't out there on the market. So I created it for myself. But what you're saying is that sometimes that might not be the right way to go. And just because it might be a problem that you're passionate about and there's purpose there, you're going to get bored of doing it every day for the next 5 years. Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying, is it really interesting that you took that? Because I think what I'm saying is that like, you've basically got to resonate with what you're doing.
Yeah.
If you're doing purpose-driven work, I would say coaching is purpose-driven work. But I have seen plenty of entrepreneurs fix problems amazingly that aren't their own problems either. So I think the whole thing is that it depends what your superordinate goal is. Let's say your superordinate goal is to, like, classic example, like make a lot of money. You might be better off strategically evaluating what the market needs and what is the governance in between creating a product that would solve a very large problem, to someone whose superordinate goal is to become really aligned with their work and feel fulfilled and purpose-driven. And then it's different questions like, okay, well, this is more personal now because it's for you, it's your purpose. So what is it that you wanted to exist for yourself? And then answering that question. So again, like all of my answers, you're being like, she's not being very clear today.
No, but it's true. And basically, that's why it's so important to bring in these different elements. Because if you're just thinking like, oh, what's my purpose and this, you might choose that, but then you might you might forget that actually what's the thing that's really important to me. If I could only have one thing, it's something else. And that choice of direction isn't going to get you what you want necessarily, or it might be harder, etc. So I totally get it.
Yeah. And actually, weirdly, the thing that I think always fits with this the best is if you think of like, it's sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we talk about the purpose-driven job at the top, that would be with self-actualization, which is you want to become the most authentic, potentialed version of you. But it depends where your needs are. Like, you might not be wanting to pursue that if your needs for like food, shelter, and water are much more apparent than you picking, the most purpose-driven piece of work that you can do. So it's about figuring out where are your needs. Your needs are going to be individual to you. And then that's more what you're probably going to go after. And you're going to have a whole different set of approaches and questions based on that. But I think what happens so much is that when you listen to people who are working self-help or self-help gurus or self-help books or all that sort of stuff, is that person's already operating from the top of the self-actualization need. And so they will give advice from that perspective.
They might forget about the
struggles
the
of where
bits,
they've had to come from and what other priorities they may have had to have made beforehand. And so that's the whole point of getting a coach to not give you advice, is because it's going to be colored from that person's perspective. And someone who is trying to figure out their safety and basic needs is not necessarily going to flourish from advice from someone who's at self-actualization at the top and just talking about people following their best selves, because maybe doing the value-driven thing that is maybe not profitable at all is actually much better done at a later date while you've sorted yourself out and your basic needs are met and everything is in place first.
Last question.
Okay.
Where can people find you, Sabrina? Because I think, that this will sort of inspire a lot of people. Where can people find you to get in touch about coaching, and who are your dream customers? Who do you get really excited about coaching?
So I get really excited about coaching. This is going to sound so cheesy, but people who want to be coached. I think the really sad thing is if you ever work in an organization, you get given someone who doesn't really want to be there. and it doesn't feel great, and it's sad, and like you don't want to spend any time like convincing someone that they should want something that they don't feel like they need. So my favorite person to work with is someone who really has a goal in mind, has something, like feels like they're ready to put in a lot of effort, that they are, of course, at 0 or above, they're fully functioning. There isn't anything that they feel like they need to be addressing in therapy or anything like that. And that really, I get really excited about my clients' goals. So I really love being like having a client who's also excited about their goals. And yes, you can be lost and you can think, oh, I don't know where I want to go and I'm really, really confused. But it's the excitement to figure it out and that willingness to try things and be a bit open and want to go after stuff. I think that's my favorite person to work with.
And particularly like entrepreneurs, business people, more the personal stuff. Any preference?
I really like, I've had a couple of founders, and I really like founders because, again, it's the complexity. And so there's so much going on.
A lot going on, yeah.
Otherwise, it's like leadership and organization. Otherwise, because again, it's the same. It's this, founders, it's a much, much smaller, but like maybe more dynamic change and complexity. This one has less dynamic change and complexity, but they both are...
The similarities.
The similarities are quite the same. And they tend to already... These are people who are high functioning, who want to function even higher, who have very clear goals in mind, but have a lot of unknowns that they might need to discover in order to
help
find...
navigate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of my favorite one, because there's so much richness with all of the things that are going on to sort of keep in mind and try and think, do I know any interventions or things that they can try, or specific questions that might unlock something. The figuring out of that one's the most exciting. And then where to find me, LinkedIn, just Sabrina Percy.
Sabrina Percy.
Yeah. My Instagram is Sabrina C. Percy. And then my website is www.sentient.co.uk.
We'll put it all on the show notes. Sabrina, I had high expectations for this conversation and you've exceeded all of them. So thank you very much indeed for coming in, and wish you all the best with your career and life and everything. Thanks a million.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I was very nervous because it was my first podcast, but you are an excellent host, and I really enjoyed it. So thanks very much.
Amazing. Thanks, Sabrina.